Welcome to the call with Nancy Sabato, where we have Christ-centered conversations that inspire and transform. Gary Varvel is a nationally recognized editorial cartoonist, but what really sets him apart is how faith shapes everything he does. Thank you for joining me today, and we're going to be talking about how your faith and art can go hand in hand, even when it's not easy.
And then for an editorial cartoonist, you have to have a worldview, a particular worldview. And I'm a conservative because I'm a Christian
Mhm.
conservative cartoonist in that order is usually what I say. And it all comes from my reading of scripture. So there's a lot of issues that are very clear. Like how many genders? Well, the Bible's very clear. God made them male and female. That's it. It's a non-negotiable. The same thing with marriage, same thing with abortion. Abortion is killing a human being that God's created in his own image. And so those issues are very easy for me. Uh, there are some issues that can be a little nuanced, but for the most part, uh, conservatism, especially when you get into like the economy and that kind of stuff. I'm not an economist, but some things make sense and some things don't make sense to me. So I try to do the best I can with that. Then the other thing is you have to have a sense of humor.
Mm,
Humor is not the key to editorial cartooning. It's a tool that we use, and
mhm,
sometimes humor is not the right tool. For instance, 9/11, there's nothing funny about that day, but I've got to draw something, and for that day, I drew Uncle Sam carrying a firefighter away from the rubble in the background.
mhm,
I was reminded of the Oklahoma City bombing back in 1996, and there was this famous photo that was taken of a firefighter carrying a small child away from the rubble. And I thought, now the firefighters become the victim, and
mhm.
so that was not funny, but the purpose was to kind of grasp the emotion of that moment and kind of document it. Years from now, people will go back and look at those different events, and editorial cartooning to kind of help give you the kind of the feel of the moment. But a lot of times, the issues, with the media tends to be more left than I am. And I was fortunate that I got to work for in the newspaper business for 40 years. I was at the Indianapolis Stars, the editorial cartoonist, for 23 years. For 16 years before that, I was at the Indianapolis News, not as the cartoonist, but as a chief artist.
Oh,
And so I still, had my hand in doing some editorial work, but a lot of times I was just doing illustrations for stories, and there was some page design that was involved in that. But yeah, it was a fun career, but at the same time, I had to always remember that I'm working for a secular newspaper and not a Christian publication. But I found opportunities, especially like Christian holidays, just to say this is what the Christian holiday means. And so I would draw cartoons about that. And the Lord just gave me favor with my editors. And so I think that was the reason I was able to stay so long. But now is a different phase. I've been on my own since 2019, January
mhm,
2019. So
mhm.
the Lord has blessed and given me new opportunities. One of the things I'm doing now is I do a Substack a few times a week called, you can find it at garyvarvel.substack.com, or you can find a link at garyvarvel.com. So you could just go to either of those two places. And it gives me an opportunity to gather a following. So I've got people who subscribe for free, a few people who want to support my work. And then what I do is in my newsletter, I show the cartoon that I've worked on, and I give you a little description about what my thought process was behind it. But I also have opportunities to write about stuff. And I kind of fell in love with writing late in my career at the newspaper, and now continuing it with Substack. And I think the Lord kind of drove me that direction. And now it's an opportunity to be a witness for the Lord. So I was a Sunday school teacher for 23 years at a
You
Baptist
were?
church. Yeah.
Wow.
And so that's a lot of time every week preparing for a lesson. And I got to know and love the Word of God.
Uh-huh.
And so now, with my interest in journalism, and the current events, I'm able to take the two things and combine them together, and give people scripture to back up my points, especially with what's going on in the Middle East.
Mhm.
It's fascinating that we are witnessing fulfillment of scripture that was written 2,600 years ago. And that is just unbelievable. If that doesn't move people, I don't know what will. I mean, the Bible is the only book that can tell you the future and it happens.
Yeah.
And it's not vague about it either. I mean, it gives lots of details. And so I love pulling those things out and writing about that. And people seem to have responded to it. And that's been a real blessing. It's interesting how the Lord works because he uses other people to kind of direct us. I'll give you, for example, a year before I left, 2018, my editor came to me and says, "Hey, um, would you write a conservative column for us? Because we don't have the money to hire a conservative columnist, and we don't have one. And we have people, readers, who are saying, 'How come you don't have a conservative?'" He said, "Would you do it once a week?" And at that time, I was doing 6 cartoons a week. He said, "Just do 4 cartoons a week, and then just spend some time doing this one column." And so uh, I hadn't written since high school. I mean, I was the sports editor of my newspaper in high school, but that's a long time. And I had written a few little things for the newspaper when I was there, but not very much and not on a consistent basis. So uh, it's a different way of thinking. With editorial cartoons, I'm trying to take the big issue and condense it down into one image.
Hmm.
And now I'm taking a big issue and I'm trying to basically make an argument, and bring it to life. And so I I said, okay, I'll do it. And right after he asked me to do that, the Las Vegas shooting happened where 53 or something like that people were killed. And so I wrote a piece because I had some stuff in my heart. Wrote a piece, quoted 2 founding fathers, and used 3 Bible verses, and sent it. And my editor put it online in about 20 minutes online, and it went viral. USA Today picked it up. Realpolitics.com picked it up. I mean, I was blown away. So it was Real Clear Politics, I should say, is the website. So that gave me encouragement. So when I left the newspaper, I had people say, "Hey, I like the way you write. Why don't you continue doing that?" So the newsletter was my avenue to do that. And
Hmm.
so I use Facebook and Instagram and Gab and a couple other social media, LinkedIn, X, trying to drive people to my newsletter because I really don't post as much as I used to post on those social media sites because I can't say what I want to say. I'll get throttled down, and I just trying to get people to come to my website to see my stuff and to my newsletter.
Yeah. So how do you respond to criticism?
Well, I've learned a long time ago that you got to grow a thick skin if you're going to be in this. If you're going to be in the public square, voicing your opinion, you're going to have a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
And when you try to take a stand for the Lord, you're going to get a lot. You got a target on your back. And I've warned my kids about that as well. You try to take a stand, but
Hmm.
I think of the words of the late Adrian Rogers, one of my favorite pastors of all time, who's with the Lord now. He said, if you've never met the devil, it's probably because you're going the same direction. And
Mm-hmm.
I've met the devil many times. You have to be going against him and go against the grain. Uh, and so, yeah, that doesn't bother me. In fact, if I don't get some negative feedback, I almost think I'm not doing my job. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
I'm a little weird that way, I guess.
No, that's not weird. I guess, you have to, if that's the pushback you need to get better at what you do and to
Yeah.
understand whose heart you're pricking, right? I mean, isn't that what
Right.
it's really about, right?
This job, you're going to get people who think you're the greatest, and then you're going to get people who think you're the devil himself. So
Mhm.
it's both. I remember listening to a sermon by Warren Wiersbe years ago, the late Warren Wiersbe, and he said, uh, God gives us cursing and blessing. If he only gave us cursing, we'd get so discouraged we wouldn't want to continue. If he gave us only blessing, we'd get prideful. He said he gives us both to keep us balanced. And boy, that has stuck with me because I know when people praise me, I don't. I don't take it serious because I know who I am and I know all my flaws and I know I don't always get it right. But when people, cuss me out and say all terrible things about me, I know I'm not that bad either. So my wife knows who I am and she stayed with me for, well, coming up on 45 years.
Oh my gosh, you guys, unbelievable. What a great family you have. And we're going to be talking about that later because
Yeah.
the audience doesn't really know who you also are, besides this editorial cartoonist, a man of God, but so much more. Now, I have to ask you a question.
Mhm.
Can you share a story where your work opened up a conversation or changed someone's perspective on the Lord?
I'll tell you one instance that happened. I guess it was the election of 2020. And I wrote in my newsletter and I showed some cartoons but my newsletter, the point of it was that if you were a Christian, if you're a Bible believing Christian, you can't vote Democrat
Mm-hmm.
because the Democratic platform is anti-Bible. It's anti-God. And I gave instances like in a convention, I think it was 2016 maybe, or maybe it was during the Obama administration, 2012. Anyway, there was a convention where on the Democratic convention where they were going to vote on whether to have God in the platform, in their platform. And when they brought it up, God got booed from the floor of the convention. And if you want to go look it up, I put a link to it in my newsletter at that time. You can look it up on YouTube. It's not, it's there. Uh,
What would
that's
it
not
be
good.
under? What would it be? What if you were
I
typing
just
it
look
in?
up Democratic convention, God gets booed. Just look it
Wow.
up. I mean, I just use keywords and it'll pop up. But so I made this point, and then not long after that, I got an email from a reader of my newsletter and said, I forwarded your newsletter to my daughter who lives in Kentucky, and it changed her vote. She was going to vote for the Democrat, and she changed because of what you wrote. Look, and I made the point that Trump is not perfect. He isn't. But given the alternative, um, Trump is more friendly to Christians and people of faith than the other side.
Mm-hmm.
It just that's not even arguable. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was my point. We weren't electing a pastor, we were electing a president. And if he's going to be friendly at least to the faith,
Mm-hmm.
then let's choose that one. The other thing in 2016 was uh, Trump at that time had selected Mike Pence to be his running mate. Well, I had been friends with Mike Pence since 1994. I knew what kind of person Mike Pence was, and we had many discussions about the Lord. And so I felt like that was for me. And in fact, I told other people who would contact me. I had a guy at Bob Jones University contact me, said, "Okay, tell me about Mike Pence." And I said, "He's the real deal." And I think, there a lot of Christians, I think, voted for Trump in 2016 because of Mike Pence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they had a falling out. I get that, and I haven't really discussed that with Mike since. I've seen him a couple of times since he left office, but
Mm-hmm.
and I love Mike dearly. But I think right now this is where the Lord, I think back to Daniel chapter 2, I think it's verse 20, 21, something like that, uh, where God raises up kings and God removes kings. And so whoever wins is because God has chosen this is what, and sometimes he picks kings, presidents to punish us, to wake us up, and sometimes he gives us presidents to bless us. So
Mm-hmm.
and then history will be the one that determines if which is the case.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because I was thinking that the whole time you're talking.
Yeah.
God raises people up for a reason, and sometimes it's also to make you seek Him more, right?
Yeah. Because the Old Testament was full of times when God, for instance, Israel wanted a king. God didn't want him. He was their king. And he tells Samuel, they have not rejected you, they rejected me. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'll give them a king, and they will weep for what he will do. And he gave him Saul. And
Mm-hmm.
so he gave him a bad king, and the people were miserable and they were constantly being tormented and from their enemies. And then God raised up David. and to
Yeah.
take his place. And so uh, you see if you know the Bible, then you don't get all bent out of shape when things don't go your way. I just say,
Yeah,
well, God's in control, and this is what He wants for us at this point.
exactly. Now that we're talking about Trump, how many times do you draw him, like in a month?
I don't draw him as much as maybe some of the liberals do, because some of
Okay.
my liberal cartoonist friends, uh, they will draw him every day. To me, of course, I'm focused more on the opposition, and and so I'm constantly poking fun at the other side. And
Hmm.
sometimes, like my newsletter today, I drew Trump, um, but I had him. He just spanked the South African president. Uh, and and so the South African president came to the Oval Office to meet with President Trump, and not knowing that Trump was just going to humiliate him in front of the world, the media had been ignoring what's going on in South Africa with white farmers who were getting their farms taken away from them and
Hmm.
not being paid, and in some
Yeah.
cases being killed. And that's
Hmm.
why some of them are fleeing that
Hmm.
country, and some of them had just recently come to America
Hmm.
for asylum.
Hmm.
And the media just was not covering it. So
Hmm.
Trump, typical Trump fashion, he just he exposes it right there in front of you. So now the media can't ignore it. He's making it public from the Oval Office. It's news
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the South African president didn't know what to hit him, didn't know what hit him.
Yeah.
I think that Trump has courage to do and say tough things because he's a billionaire.
Hmm.
And, if this all fails, then he just goes back to his life of money and business and all the stuff he loves anyway.
Hmm.
But I think I've been in a lot of editorial board meetings when I was at the newspaper, and politicians come in to meet with us, and you can tell they're walking on eggs. They are very careful about every word they say. They're afraid they're going to look bad,
Hmm.
and they're telling you what they think you want to hear. Well,
Hmm.
that's not real. That's not
Yeah. Yeah.
truthful.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a guy who just comes in and says, look, I don't care what you guys think. This is what I was elected to do. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But this
Yeah.
is what I was elected to do. And I don't
Hmm.
work for you guys. You guys can cover me, but I work for the American people. I mean,
Hmm.
that's refreshing when you see that.
When things get tough for you or you get discouraged, what motivates you to keep using your gifts for God?
Deadlines. You you have you have deadlines. You know what they call a cartoonist who misses deadlines? Unemployed.
Oh my gosh.
So you have to you got to meet deadlines. Um, I remember the quote by Charles Schultz, the famous cartoonist for Peanuts, and he said he is a professional and he doesn't get writer's block
Yeah.
because he's a professional. And he
Yeah.
said, but I've had a lot of bad days.
Yeah.
He said there are days when the deadline's getting close, and he said you have to do something. And he said I come up with something, and sometimes it's bad, but uh, every cartoonist has those days. Every creator is going to have those days.
Mm.
And then you just hope that the good days outweigh the bad. Every once in a while, you'll have a good day. I used to come home from work when I would go to the office and I would tell my wife, well, I forgot how to do my job today. It was just like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
But then a lot of times that happens when Congress goes on vacation
Hmm.
because there's nothing happening and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do now. A lot of
Hmm.
times I'll do evergreen cartoons, meaning evergreen when you can run them anytime. They're not tied to a news source or a news event. Ideas, I'm always asked, where do you get your ideas? Ideas come from almost everywhere. I'll watch a TV, if I'm watching The Five in the evening, sometimes those guys will say something and I think, okay, that's a visual right there. I can use that. That's good. And then sometimes it's something I read because I'm giving you a visual picture of a spiritual truth.
Hmm.
And so it's been a challenge, but it's been fun.
I like that. Well, for someone listening who wants to make a difference with their own gifts, what's one practical step they can take to start today?
And I'm a creator. I have always kind of liked making things. From the time I was in art class when I was in elementary, I had an art teacher who recognized that and encouraged me to take art in high school. Um, Her name was Beverly Frazier. I remember the teachers had an impact on my life. Nancy Sutton was my journalism teacher in high school, and she had a huge impact on me. And she was the one who encouraged me that I could make a living doing this. I met Jerry Barnett, who was the editorial cartoonist for the Indianapolis News when I was 17 years old. I was given his phone number and encouraged to call him. And my teacher made me go call him right then during the day. And he answered the phone, and I didn't know at the time that phone call would change my life, and it did. Because that became, I met him later, and I thought, boy, this is what I want to do. I really kind of divorced all the alternatives at that point. This is what I thought I was supposed to do. So I think God will put a desire into your heart, and He did that for me. But it's not just the desire; He has to put some talent in there as well. I think of American Underdog, American Idol. American Underdog, that's a different movie. That was a movie that Brett was in, my son. American Idol, the TV show. In the early part of that show, you have people and they'll bring them before the judges and they can't sing. They're terrible.
Mm.
But they're there and they're passionate. They get so
Yes.
upset, So they have the passion, but they don't have the talent. You got to have both.
Yeah.
And and also if you have the talent in whatever it is, people other than your parents will recognize it. You have to have your parents kind of, I think, encourage it. And my parents encouraged me, but
Yeah.
they would have encouraged me in most anything. But when you have a professional, tell you, you got what it takes. If this is what you want to do, I think that you can do it, but you got to work hard at it. And then the thing about doing something that God's given you to do, it doesn't seem like work because you love doing it, man. And that's
Yeah.
been my career. I've loved drawing cartoons. I always say the best thing about drawing cartoons is getting paid for it. That's the best when people want to
Absolutely.
want to pay for that. So that for me, it was kind of my journey. I encourage, young people, if God's given you a talent, has He given you the passion? And has He given you a passion? Is He giving you a talent to go with that passion? And it has to be verified by other people, not your parents. It's my parents were so encouraging to me and gave me the courage to try, and keep doing it. But it was when I met this cartoonist, this professional, and he encouraged me, and I still keep in touch with him today. And when I tell him, thank you, thank you, thank you, he says, Gary, I didn't do much. Well, he did more than he even knew just by telling a young kid, if you want to do this, I think you got the talent to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and then I just worked, it's just hundreds of thousands of drawings, it seems like. I for 14 years I taught high school art at Bethesda Christian School in my
Mhm.
hometown here. I would tell the students, because they'd get real pressured about starting a drawing or painting, and I'd say, most of the stuff I draw goes in the trash. I said, you're not perfect on every one. You just have to kind of feel it out, get your direction. Then once you made some mistakes, then you can go back and, okay, now I know what I'm supposed to do with it.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is just giving students courage to put a mark on the page and see what happens with it. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's the way with me. Uh, my sons and my daughter, they have their own different path. And my job as their father was to study my children and recognize where their talents are good and where they're not, and then
Hmm.
encourage them in the direction where I think they should go. I think the verse in Proverbs was it 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. I
Hmm.
think that's more than just spiritual. I think it is what gift has God given them?
Hmm.
And maybe he wants to use that in their life to impact other people. And that's what it's really, to me, that's what it's all about, serving the Lord.
Hmm. Well, first, let me tell everyone, if you want to know more about Gary, and listen, he sent me these books. I gotta show you. I gotta show you. Okay, first, this one. And if anybody out there, you're taking the lead from him, okay? it's drawing the right way, a conservative cartoonist view of the world, and that's by Gary. And look at these pictures, and he's got them all in here. I mean, this is my gift. This is my gift. Nobody's getting this copy, so nobody out
Mm,
there is getting this. Okay, now the other one. Okay, like as soon as I see this book, I want to give it to my grandchildren. But no, you know what? I'm not gonna because I'm gonna keep it in my house and read it to them. And it's
mhm.
The Good Shepherd, and Gary wrote it and he designed it. And oh, I mean, the story at the end, I actually was having some tears in my eyes. And my
Mm.
audience always knows that when the Holy Spirit, shows me that something is written or said that that it just gets to my heart. This is one of those books. So you can pick up these two books. Again, here's the other. Get them from GaryVarvel.com.
Yeah,
Or you can see what he writes on GaryVarvel.substack.com.
yeah.
You can go to Facebook, it's at Gary Varvel. Instagram is at Gary Varvel, and on X is at Varvel. So he's got a lot going on here. He's all over the place, well known cartoonist, loves the Lord.
Can I tell you real quickly about the Good Shepherd book, how that came about? In 2014, we created a movie, produced a movie called The War Within, and it's a movie about your soul. And we depict your soul as six different characters: your mind, emotion, will, conscience, memory, and heart. And in that movie, we go inside this man's soul. We see the wrestling and arguments that are going on inside of him. And then we come out and we see what his life is like. But we have this book as a plot device that we use in the movie. It's his daughter's favorite book, and it teaches a child about death from a biblical perspective. Death is not the end if you know the Good Shepherd, because then you're taken to a place where life will never end. And so I produced the book, and it sells pretty well on our websites, and you can also find it at houseofgracefilms.org.
If Gary's story challenged or encouraged you, share this episode with a friend. Leave a comment about how you're using your gifts, or let us know what stood out for you. Your story matters, and you never know who might need to hear it. Please like and subscribe and share for more Christ-centered conversations. Visit the website, thecallwithNancySabato.com. Until next time, all glory and honor to King Jesus.